It's been 6 months since I started reviewing new point-and-click titles rather than picking games at random until Wadget Eye released something, and I have to say, I'm still enjoying it. Besides, if the only new games coming out were AGS Engine low-res pixel art affairs, then we'd get bored pretty quickly. So let's look at Cathy Rain, a low-res pixel art game made in the AGS Engine. Well, it has yet to steer Wadget Eye wrong, so there's still hope. Let's poke the story until it falls over or something. Back in the mid-90s, which I keep having to remind myself was 20 years ago, not 10, a journalism student by the name of Cathy Rain stumbles into her dorm room in a state of drunken, wait a second, I'm getting deja vu here. Her roommate Eileen delivers some bad news about Cathy's grandfather. But in a, hey, you might know this guy who just died kind of way, which would suggest to me she's taking this journalism thing a bit too seriously. Or maybe not, because she made the potential connection, i.e. the whole reason she brought this up in the first place, and yet didn't consider the possibility that it might be true and Cathy could get upset about it being revealed so flippantly. Maybe she thought Cathy would brush it off as might fit Eileen's impression of her personality, but I might be thinking of my own interpretation which states, Cathy Rain done give no fucks. The next day sees Cathy head to the funeral and finally reunite with her recently widowed grandmother, whom she agrees to talk to back at her house after dodging a particularly pushy priest. Mental note, write sentences which are easier to pronounce. After catching up on literally decades of missing history, Cathy's mother took her away from the family years ago, long story, Cathy finds out her grandfather had been in a vegetative state since 1981 following an unexplained incident. Sensing the chance to test her journalistic book learning and wanting to give her grand some closure, Cathy gets to work on finding out what really happened that night. Now, I made a glib comparison to Wadget Eye Games' games earlier, and I was only half joking. Cathy Rain was created by Clifftop Games, but Wadget Eye handled all the voice acting and David Gilbert himself has a few small roles. The low-res graphics and the character portraits, minimal interface and a female protagonist all earmark what I presume to be Cathy Rain's influence quite clearly. But the main character, aside from riding a Corley Motors motorcycle, wink wink, even carries a notebook as seen in all the Blackwell games, as seen before that in Discworld Noir. She smokes as well, but that only connects it to one Wadget Eye game, so it's pretty far down the list, and I'm not even sure where this tombstone lies. Where Cathy Rain differs from Wadget Eye's fare is in the interface department. I like to think of this as a hybrid between the 2-button and coin interfaces. If there's only one action for an item, left click performs it. If there's more than one, you get the coin and make your choice. I would make those buttons bigger myself. They're a little hard to hit and it's not obvious what does what at a glance. Generally speaking, it's left for look, bottom for think and right for use or talk, but it entirely depends on the item. What might be think for one item could be eject tape for another, assuming the another in question is a tape recorder. This means that right clicking and mouse wheeling get roundly ignored, but I'm not too annoyed this time. Aside from scrolling the inventory and reading the occasional paper document, I don't really see a use for the mouse wheel here. We can easily live without it. Same for right clicking really, the only use I can see is for cancelling out of close-ups or dismissing the coin interface. It does clear whatever inventory item you happen to be wielding however, so there you go, it has one job. Glad to see they've implemented object highlighting even in a purely text form. Weirdly enough, both that and the notebook get a keyboard shortcut, but the inventory doesn't. I'm seriously starting to think there's a technical reason for not implementing this because it's awfully widespread in AGS games. Either that or they all hate my guts, Illuminati confirmed. As for the game's content, I'm giving this a I think it's quite good rating. I feel the experience I got was worth the $13 I paid, despite the hours to dollars ratio probably not matching up to some other titles I've recommended, hence why I say the experience I got rather than how many hours I got. While I can't promise I would have played this all in a winner, I never particularly wanted to put it down, but apparently I can't go to work on absolutely no sleep or some old-fashioned bullshit like that. Took about 5.5 hours over 4 sessions, which is pretty speedy for me, and I put at least some of that down to the character you play as. You might expect an anti-authority character like Cathy to be constantly confrontational, swearing up a storm and wielding her stun gun like a feather duster, but she doesn't. She won't take anyone's shit for sure, but she's perfectly capable of compassion as well as the expected snark she exhibits. Whilst the story centres on what happened to her grandfather, it's also informed by Cathy's own backstory and the troubles she's had to face in a mere 20 odd years. When she finally gets visibly upset, it's been built up to a point where it actually means something. However, there is a flashback fairly early on, which, without spoiling anything, I don't think was as subtle as it could have been. Then again, when the revelation comes back, it comes back hard. A solid effort to tackle a very adult issue, if a little bit rushed. The whole tone of the game starts off with this detective in a small town vibe, gradually getting weirder and creepier, and the music changes to match, usually keeping quite subtle and only turning strange and spoopy when it's called for. I'd make a Twin Peaks comparison at this point if I'd ever watched more than one episode. I should probably fix that. There could be another reason for me getting through this so quickly though, and depending on your perspective, it could be classed as a negative. I found the puzzles in this game to be fairly straightforward, with two exceptions. One I got stuck on because I'd forgotten that phone books exist, the other was where I'd accidentally guessed a lock combination, and I still don't know how you figure that one out. So it's not nail through your balls difficult, not for me anyway, but I still wanted to keep playing, and I don't think that was entirely down to the sense of accomplishment I got from ploughing through it. To bring up Full Throttle once again, that's a game that cut out a lot of cruft. You're looking for several items to repair a bike, you find one, cut back to the mechanic shop. You don't need to see Ben Hollett back, you accept that he and his magnificent chin got the job done. Cathy Rain does a few similar things to make your gaming experience easier, such as disabling locations once you have no reason to return, and the aforementioned don't show the verb coin if there's only one action feature. I appreciate that. It signals that the game isn't out to waste your time or keep you playing for the mere sake of playing longer. Of course, this kind of streamlining can go too far in the case of the Orion Conspiracy, which outright spoils the solution to a puzzle you haven't even come across yet. Thankfully, Cathy Rain doesn't do that. I just like complaining about the Orion Conspiracy. You also get on-screen indicators when new notes or locations are discovered. Can't fault that. I also have to mention a late game puzzle that has you solve a riddle to get a code. It would have probably been too high a difficulty spike had the game not helped walk you through each part. Not that it makes the puzzle easy, mind you, more than it makes the puzzle manageable. It's the kind of puzzle where you might have started getting pens and paper out, but being the only one of its kind in the game, the developers apparently decided they should represent all of that on screen instead. Like I said, the puzzle wasn't easy, so I think they pulled that off really well. Man, it is really difficult to talk about that bit without spoiling anything. There's a couple of specialist items in here too. The notebook, obviously, pulls double duty as your dialogue tree most of the time. No combining of notes here, but it does the job. Sadly, the keyboard shortcuts for dialogue choice don't extend to when you're asking questions from the notebook. Another item you get quite early is a tape recorder. Some games might have been content to have you insert tape, play tape, and that's it. Clifftop games had different ideas, clearly, because you can play, pause, rewind, and fast forward the tapes. It's that little bit of extra effort to make an item feel more real that makes me like this game all the more. I know that setting a game in the 90s can often be a cop-out to explain why characters don't just call each other on mobile phones, so it's great to see the setting embraced more fully, even if a significant portion of the modern audience might not know what a tape is, but are they really playing point-and-click games? I'm somewhat doubtful. So overall, I think this was a good one, be it as somebody who enjoys point-and-click adventures, grew up in the 90s, or had a goth phase for which thankfully no pictures remain. This appeals to me. The main character was someone I was very happy to play as, obligatory reference to Rufus and Deponia the little shit dear god why die in a well, and it was a nicely assembled mystery game with a well-told story. I'm hoping to see more of this, and between the moment before the credits roll and the sort of subtitle "A Detective is Born," it seems to me like that's the plan, at least later on since that subtitle was actually patched in. How very odd indeed. Anyway, if this is what they're putting out now, I'm definitely looking forward to what Clifftop Games produces in the future.